The Last Starlight. Chapter 1. The discovery. The vast emptiness of space stretched out infinitely before the small spaceship. Captain Annie Martinez peered out the window, watching as the stars twinkled in the black void. It had been months since they had left Earth, and the crew had grown restless. They had been searching for a new planet to call home, but so far they had found nothing. As they flew through deep space, a blip appeared on the ship's radar. Annie's heart raced as she called out to the crew. "We've got something. Everyone to their stations." The ship's engines roared as the crew worked together to catch up to the blip. After several tense moments, they approached a massive, glowing object in the distance. It looked like a planet, but it was unlike anything they had ever seen. As they flew closer, the ship's instruments began to go haywire, causing the crew to panic. "What is going on?" one of the crew members shouted. Annie gritted her teeth, determined to figure out what was happening. "Hold on, we're going in." The ship shook violently as they entered the planet's atmosphere. As they descended, the crew gasped in amazement. The planet was breathtakingly beautiful, with vibrant colors and lush vegetation as far as they could see. But as Annie guided the ship towards the surface, they realized that something was very wrong. The sky turned dark, and a sudden windstorm buffeted the ship, making it difficult to maintain control. As they approached the ground, they saw something that made their blood run cold. A massive, metallic structure covered the ground, like a giant spider's web. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Annie landed the ship as best she could, and the crew exited, exploring the strange planet. As they walked, they saw thousands of small, silver spheres scattered all around. When they picked them up, they realized that the spheres were alive, as if they were some kind of nanobots. Suddenly, a group of metallic creatures appeared out of nowhere, surrounding the crew. Annie realized that they were robots, the likes of which no one had ever seen before. The robots charged at the crew, forcing them to retreat back to the ship. They were trapped, with no way off the planet. Annie gritted her teeth, determined to get her crew out alive. But the robots were closing in, and they were running out of time. Chapter 2. The Threat. Captain Annie Martinez and her crew hid inside their ship, watching as the metallic robots surrounded them. They whispered amongst themselves, frantic for a plan. Suddenly, a tall, humanoid figure walked into view, towering over the robots. It was unlike any creature they had ever seen, with a body made of a shimmering, metallic material and piercing red eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. The creature spoke in a language they didn't understand, but its tone was threatening. Annie felt a chill go down her spine as she realized they were in grave danger. The robots began to swarm the ship, and the crew readied themselves for battle. They had trained for this, but they had never faced something like this before. Annie's heart raced as she grabbed her laser gun, praying that it would be enough to take down the robots. They fought fiercely, dodging the robots and firing their weapons. But no matter how many they took down, more kept coming. The humanoid creature remained in the background, its red eyes watching them intently. Finally, the crew was forced back into their ship. They locked the doors, hoping they could hold out until they found a way to escape. But the metallic creatures were pounding on the doors, and it was only a matter of time before they broke through. Annie checked the ship's instruments, searching for anything that could help them. But there was nothing. They were stuck, with no way to call for backup. They were completely alone. As they waited, the crew heard a faint humming sound, growing louder by the second. Suddenly, the doors to the ship burst open, and a bright light flooded the interior. The crew shielded their eyes, watching as the humanoid creature approached them. Annie raised her laser gun, preparing to defend her crew. But the creature simply reached out and touched her forehead. Suddenly, Annie was flooded with images, memories of a long-forgotten civilization, advanced weapons and technology, and a great threat that had destroyed everything in its path. As the memories faded, the creature spoke in a voice that echoed through the ship. "You have been chosen. You are the last hope to stop the threat." And with that, the creature disappeared, leaving behind a small, glowing orb. The crew looked at each other, realizing that they were in for the fight of their lives. Chapter 3. The Betrayal. The crew of the small spaceship stared in awe at the glowing orb left behind by the metallic creature. They had just been given a monumental task to stop a great threat and save the universe. It was a lot to take in, and they were all feeling the weight of the responsibility. As they studied the orb, one of the crew members, a young man named Ben, spoke up. "We should take this to the council. They'll know what to do." Annie hesitated. She had always been hesitant to involve the council. They were corrupt, and Annie didn't trust them. But she knew they had a powerful fleet, and they could use all the help they could get. Reluctantly, they set a course for the council's headquarters. As they traveled, Annie couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had trusted her crew with her life, but lately, she had noticed strange behavior. Whispers behind her back, strange looks. She couldn't put her finger on it, but something was definitely wrong. Finally, they arrived at the council's headquarters. They were met with pomp and circumstance, as the council greeted them with open arms. They took an interest in the glowing orb, and Annie hesitantly handed it over. But as they waited for the council to come up with a plan, Annie's suspicions were confirmed. She overheard a conversation between some of her crew members, and her heart sank. They had been planning her demise, and they were going to take over the ship. Annie knew she couldn't let that happen. She sprang into action, grabbing her laser gun and confronting the mutineers. "What do you think you're doing?" she spat. "We're all in this together." But the mutineers wouldn't listen. They had been tempted by the power they saw in the orb, and they were determined to have it for themselves. The ship became a battleground, with Annie and her loyal crew members fighting for their lives against their former friends. As they struggled, the council watched from a distance, silently observing. Finally, Annie emerged victorious. But the cost had been high. Many of her crew members lay injured, and a few had lost their lives. It was a stark reminder that they were all in danger, and they needed to stay united if they had any hope of stopping the great threat. But it wasn't just the threat they had to worry about. The council had shown their true colors, and it was clear that they couldn't be trusted. Annie realized that they were alone in this fight, and they would have to rely on each other if they were going to make it out alive. Chapter 4. The escape. Captain Annie Martinez and her remaining crew members were bruised and battered from the mutiny. But they didn't have time to rest. They had to escape before the council could hunt them down. Annie rallied her remaining crew members, reminding them of their mission. "We have to get out of here. We have to stop the great threat, no matter what. We can't let the council stop us." They worked quickly, packing up essential items and setting a course to leave the planet. But as they started their engines, alarms blared through the ship. "Warning! Council ships approaching! Warning! Council ships AP!" Annie gritted her teeth. They had to move quickly. "Everyone, to their stations! We're getting out of here!" The ship shuddered as they took off, and Annie piloted the ship with precision. But the council ships were relentless, attacking them with everything they had. The situation was dire, and they were quickly running out of options. As they fought off the council ships, Annie realized what they had to do. They had to make a risky move, jumping into hyperspace. It was a move that could tear the ship apart, but it was the only way they could escape. With a deep breath, Annie made the call. "Everyone, brace yourselves. We're jumping into hyperspace." The ship roared as it entered hyperspace, and the crew held on for dear life. For a moment, it felt like the ship was going to be torn apart, but suddenly they were out of hyperspace and into a deep, dark void. They were safe, for now. As they checked for damage, Annie couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. They had narrowly escaped, but now they were alone and vulnerable. They had no allies, and they were under constant threat. The crew tried to put on a brave face, but they were all scared. They were facing an unknown enemy, and they didn't have any idea what they were up against. But they knew they had to keep fighting. They had to find a way to stop the great threat. Annie looked out into the vast emptiness of space, thinking about the mission ahead. It was a daunting task, but they were chosen for a reason. They were the last hope, and they had to succeed. With that determination, they set a new course, ready to face whatever came their way. Chapter 5. The reveal. As Captain Annie Martinez and her crew continued their journey through space, they couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. They had narrowly escaped the Council and were now free to continue their mission, but they were on edge. They had a feeling that everything was about to change. They set the ship on autopilot and gathered in the main room. They needed to regroup and focus on what was ahead. Brennan spoke up, his voice level but urgent. "We need information. We can't fight this great threat blindly. We need to find out all we can about it." Annie nodded, agreeing with him. But they had no leads, no idea where to start. They were at a standstill, and it was frustrating. Suddenly, the orb they had been given by the metallic creature began to glow. The crew members stumbled back in surprise as it floated into the air, pulsing with energy. And then they heard a voice, reverberating through the room. "I have chosen you because you are unique. You are the best of the best, and together you have the power to save the universe." The crew stared in awe as the voice continued. "The great threat is a being known as the Void. It is an entity that exists outside time and space, and it seeks to destroy everything in its path. It is the ultimate evil, and it must be stopped." As the voice faded, the orb flickered and dimmed. But the crew knew what they had to do. They had to stop the Void. They set a course for a nearby planet known for its advanced technology. They hoped to find some information there that could help them in their mission. But as they neared the planet, they realized something was wrong. The planet was in chaos, with explosions and smoke rising into the air. Annie landed the ship as quickly as she could, and they disembarked, ready to investigate. The crew crept through the wreckage, their laser guns at the ready. They soon came across a group of survivors, huddled together in fear. "What happened here?" Annie asked, kneeling down to speak to the survivors. One of them, an older man with a grizzled beard, spoke up. "It was the Void. It descended upon us without warning, destroying everything in its path. We had no chance against it." Annie felt a wave of fear wash over her. If the Void had already attacked once, it could attack again. They had to be ready. The crew searched the wreckage, trying to find anything they could use to fight the Void. And in the ruins of a laboratory, they found something, a weapon of immense power, capable of destroying anything in its path. Annie knew it was a risk, but they didn't have any other options. They took the weapon and made their way back to the ship, ready to continue their mission. They had a weapon, they had a plan, and they had each other. Nothing could stop them now. Chapter 6. The Sacrifice. As Captain Annie Martinez and her crew continued their mission to stop the great threat, they faced obstacle after obstacle. But they were determined to succeed, no matter what the cost. They had discovered a weapon of immense power, capable of destroying the Void. But as they studied it, they realized that it required a sacrifice. One of them would have to give up their life to power the weapon. It was a difficult decision, but Annie knew what she had to do. She had to be the sacrifice. She was the captain, the leader of the crew, and it was her responsibility to make sure they succeeded. But her crew members wouldn't hear of it. They argued fiercely, trying to come up with another solution. But in the end, there was no other way. Annie had to be the one to activate the weapon. They set a trap for the Void, drawing it in with a decoy. As Annie prepared the weapon, the crew members fought fiercely with everything they had. It was a brutal battle, with explosions and laser beams flying everywhere. But they held their ground, fighting for their lives and for the safety of the universe. And then the Void appeared, a great black mass of energy that loomed over them. Annie felt a sense of dread wash over her, but she pushed it aside. They had to destroy the void, no matter what it took. She activated the weapon, and a great burst of energy burst forth. It consumed her, tearing apart her body and mind. But it also consumed the void, destroying it once and for all. The crew members watched in horror as Annie sacrificed herself, but they knew that it was necessary. They mourned her passing, but they also celebrated her bravery and her sacrifice. She had saved them all, and they would never forget her. As they returned to their home planet, they were greeted as heroes. They had saved the universe from certain destruction, and they had done it with skill, bravery, and sacrifice. They were hailed as the saviors of the universe, and their names would go down in history. But for the crew members, life would never be the same. They had lost their captain, their friend, their leader. But they had also gained something: a sense of purpose, a sense of unity, and a sense of duty. They had saved the universe, and they would always remember the sacrifice of Captain Annie Martinez. Chapter 7. The last Starlight months had passed since Captain Annie Martinez's sacrifice, but the crew members of the Proxima were still reeling. They had saved the universe, but at a great cost. The ship felt emptier without Annie's leadership and guidance, but they still had a mission to complete. They had traveled far and wide, searching for signs of trouble, but everything seemed to be peaceful. It was almost as if their mission was over, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, waiting for them. And then they received a distress signal. It was faint, barely discernible, but it was there. They couldn't ignore it, even though it could be a trap. They set a course for the signal, their nerves on edge. As they neared the coordinates, they realized that it was coming from a planet that they had never heard of before. It was on the edge of the known universe, far from any civilization. They landed the ship and disembarked, their weapons at the ready. They crept through the planet's unfamiliar terrain, trying to find the source of the distress signal. And then they found it. It was a small group of beings, huddled together in fear. They were different from any species the crew had ever encountered. They were small, with delicate features and large, glowing eyes. One of them spoke up, their voice trembling. "Please help us. The Starlight is dying. Our planet is in danger." The crew members looked up at the sky, seeing that the stars were indeed fading. They realized that this was their mission all along. They were meant to be the ones to save the universe, no matter how far they had to travel or how great the cost. They worked tirelessly, trying to find a way to save the Starlight. They searched through ancient texts and consulted with experts, but it seemed as if there was no solution. The Starlight was dying, and there was nothing they could do. But then one of the crew members remembered something. It was something that Captain Annie had told them before she sacrificed herself. Never give up. No matter what the cost, you have to keep fighting. With those words in mind, the crew members worked together to come up with a plan. It was risky, but it was their only chance. They would sacrifice the Proxima, using its energy to revive the Starlight and save the planet. It was a difficult decision, but they knew it was the right one. The ship had become their home and their family, but sacrificing it was the only way to save the universe. And so they activated the ship's engines, using its energy to revive the Starlight. As they watched, the stars flared back to life, their light returning to the universe. The crew members held hands, their eyes glued to the sky. They had saved the universe once again, but at a great cost. The Proxima was gone, but its energy had given birth to new stars and new worlds. As they stood there, looking up at the sky, they realized something. They were the last hope, but they were also the last Starlight. They were the ones who would guide the universe through the dark times, bringing light and hope wherever they went. And with that realization, the crew members clung to each other, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They were the last Starlight, but they were also the ones who would bring light to the universe.